So good morning, folks. We're going to just give 1 minute for attendees to filter in. Okay. I'd like to welcome you all to our latest, our April Simon Talk. We are joined today by Charlotte Sheridan, who's president of the RIAI, and to talk about low-rise, medium-density housing in Ireland. I think for anyone who knows the Simon Talk, if you've been a regular attendee, you know that what we look at in these conversations is to look at the different policy initiatives that are out there. Oftentimes we're gathering them up for our own work and sort of, I suppose, presenting them through the lens of homelessness, but we feel there's a real value in creating a forum where we can come together and present sort of the original material and the original ideas in full force, to sort of supporters and friends of Simon also have an opportunity to gaze at them unhindered by our internal analysis. And for that reason, we have a long association with the RIAI. As people might know, Simon Open Door is now, next year will be 20 years running. So it's been a wonderful collaboration for all that time. But I think this is the first time we've had a member of the RIAI come to speak to us at one of these events. So that's a really welcome initiative. And the number of people who've signed up, I think, is indicative of the contribution that the RIAI make to the policy world and to the importance of what they have to say. So with that, I'll just briefly introduce Charlotte, who is a registered architect and town planner with over 20 years professional experience as a director of Sheridan Woods, an architect and urban planning practice. A passionate advocate for quality-led plans for towns, villages, and urban neighbourhoods, Charlotte has specialised in urban regeneration, housing, sustainable communities, and collaborative planning in towns and cities in Ireland, with past experience in London and Berlin. Charlotte Sheridan is RIAI president for the 2022-2023, and is also a member of the Irish Planning Institute and its Urban Design Committee, and a board member of NAMA since 2020. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Charlotte. Sorry, just one last thing. As Charlotte is presenting, if any questions occur, just pop them into the Q&A or the chat, and we'll pick them up once Charlotte has finished presenting. So hopefully it should be about 15-20 minutes for a Q&A afterwards. So please do ask any questions you have. And if you are online on Twitter or any other of the many social media outlets, if you use the hashtag Simon Talks, that would be great. Over to Charlotte. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wayne, and thank you for the introduction. And I'm delighted to speak with you today, and honoured to be the first RIAI member to participate on the Simon Talk. So I'll share my screen with you, just make sure that this is working. And from beginning. So I'm delighted this morning to speak about the low-rise, medium-density housing typology that we're promoting as a typology for new housing in Ireland. And just to give you some context, the RIAI was founded in 1839, so we've been around for some time, and consider ourselves really the home of architecture in Ireland. We represent over 4,000 members, and that includes registered architects and architectural technologists, and all of whom work in the public and private and voluntary sectors. And of course, many of us work in the area of housing and housing delivery. And the work that we do in the RIAI is guided by our strategy. It's at the heart of our organisation. And the mission is based on 3 key ambitions. And that's to promote architecture that delivers sustainable solutions, and and creative resilient solutions to serve society and our environment. And I suppose it is that holistic approach that we adopt, that it is both society and environment that we give key consideration to. Also, that we support our members in the practice of architecture and their career progression through advocacy, collegiality, and lifelong learning. And events like these are very important to us as well in that respect. And to protect standards through registration and continuous professional development and learning within the architectural profession. And I suppose these really provide the key area of focus to deliver our vision and to inspire excellence in architecture and to deliver a resilient and sustainable future. And I suppose what's really important in that regard is that architecture is not just about buildings, but it's also about the spaces and places that the buildings create. It's the collective, and that is absolutely critical to us in terms of what it is that we're achieving, and it's for the places for people really that we're trying to achieve. And I suppose our strategy is supported by 6 objectives, and I think the one that I'd just like to focus on today is just in relation to Objective E, the strategy to develop and communicate the body of knowledge within the architectural profession to policymakers, members of society, in the form of advocacy, advice and research. And that's really important in terms of sharing our ideas, and so that we can come up with the best solutions to issues that are confronting us. And housing, of course, is one of the key issues that's facing us at the moment. So we like to bring what we can to that discussion. And all of the work that we do is very much aligned with the National Policy on Architecture, Places for People. And I suppose this is really a key element in terms of how it is that we go about our business. And I think the National Policy on Architecture really encapsulates that concept of what it is all about, really. It's about creating really great places for people. The objectives that support that policy relate to sustainability, quality, leadership and culture, and all of those things are really about embedding those values and the values and importance of ensuring that the environments that we create for people are to a high quality, but that they're sustainable as well. And I suppose it goes back then to what our strategy is about as well, sustainability and resilient future for all. And a key element of that then in terms of how we can implement that is to value and empower, to set the quality agenda and to generate knowledge. And generating knowledge is part and parcel of this research element that we work within. So I just thought I'd share with you just some of the research areas where we look. Our Urban Design Committee have developed the RIAI Town and Village Toolkit, which is providing practical advice and references, as well as successful case studies of places that have overcome challenges. And that's through the use of architectural urban design expertise and through collaboration. During COVID, we developed the top tips for designing outdoor spaces for living. And that was really important in terms of, maximizing the benefit and value of the public spaces that we have and ensuring that we can create the best possible places for the businesses and the wider community and society itself. We also carry out urban design charrettes. Our urban design committee have led a number of charrettes, and that's again to assist communities to create and to maximize the benefit of the assets that they have in their towns. We've carried out those for Drogheda and Mallow. The RIAI design review as well is a process that we've developed to assist clients and communities with creating and to enable visions for their sites, for their towns or for their neighbourhoods. And that has been a very effective way to ensure that you develop a system of collaboration between the community or the client itself, and to assist them to write their brief in the first instance for the projects that they're trying to lead. We had a lovely publication, Old House, New Home, a number of years ago. And with that was a film as well that focused on the reuse and adaptation of historic buildings into residential use. And I think it's a really lovely and accessible document. And as well as that, the film then gives a really great inspiration as to what it is that we can do with our existing structures. And I suppose there's a strong emphasis at the moment on the value and benefit of reusing existing structures. And we're currently developing Old Town, New Place, and this has a slightly different emphasis. It'll tell the story of how places and buildings in towns and villages and the potential that they have in being transformed through quality design interventions. which includes other things, other elements, including working hubs, artist studios, cultural uses, cafes and shops, as well as living over the shops. I think it was important as well just to highlight the architecture competitions that we're carrying, and one that we're holding at the moment is the town centre living competition, and this aligns very much along with the low-rise medium density housing policy that we're promoting. I suppose what this competition, into collaboration with the department but also with the number of local authorities, it's trying to identify ways and to promote innovative design solutions for housing in our town centres. And I suppose then that has a multiplier effect. It can create regeneration of our towns and villages. It's a means to do that, but it's also creating places to live and reusing those places that already benefit from existing infrastructure availability. And so they're prime locations to provide new homes for people and places, to create great places. Wayne, you mentioned Simon Open Door, and we're really delighted to be collaborating with yourselves. And just to remind everyone again that will be starting and available to book, in fact, now at the moment, and will be held between the 8th and 14th of May. And this is a great way to make that connection with architects and with stakeholders as well, and for a good cause. But just moving on then to the housing policy that we've developed with our housing task force. I suppose our committee on housing have been engaged in research into the potential reform and improvement of the Irish housing policy standards since 2017. It's always been a focus for us, and we put this on hold at the time of the department's review of the apartment guidelines in 2018. But I suppose in the intervening years, it's become really apparent of the need to look back on this. And our members who specialise in the delivery of homes have been really concerned, I suppose, and are increasingly concerned with the sustainability of the emerging housing model, and I suppose that lack of innovative models in this area. And I suppose what we're promoting is that this low-rise medium density housing model should be introduced and prioritised as a distinct category within any new directives on housing policy. And because we see this as being really a really great means to enable architects, urban designers and clients in both the public and the private sector to produce a new generation of high quality sustainable residential communities that is fit for purpose for the 21st century. And that it will also provide a means in which we can significantly raise the standards and improve the choice of housing and the quality of housing but also that it also includes the quality of the public realm within which the residential neighbourhoods have been created. And I suppose what we're really promoting is it's not just the design of an individual dwelling, but it is that wider neighbourhood that's being created, and that we're creating sustainable neighbourhoods. So if we look to the existing barriers that we're faced with at the moment in terms of achieving this type of standard, the kind of issues that we've been faced with is regulatory constraints, and I suppose that emanates through the local authority development plans and the development plan management standards. But also, I suppose, it's adherence to historic planning principles, and these are principles that came into force in the early 1900s, and they have stuck with us. And while they were of value, at the time they were achieving 12 dwellings per acre, which is 30 dwellings per hectare in towns, and densities of 8 dwellings per acre to 20 dwellings per hectare. So I suppose what that translates is quite a low form of residential density. You can see this configuration here, and it's more along the garden city model, but I suppose what it doesn't achieve is it doesn't maximize the best use of existing infrastructure that's in place, and which represents a low density that doesn't satisfy, I suppose, our current sustainable needs. And while the current formula that we're operating under can achieve high densities, it's not generally producing the type of high standards of sustainable residential communities that us ourselves as architects and urban designers, and indeed that the general public would aspire to. And there's a significant difficulty in achieving housing solutions that are above the 30 units per hectare, and that is contrary to government aspirations. And I suppose our reliance on a high-rise, high-cost build-to-rent apartment scheme model is very much dependent on the completion of the whole scheme for those dwellings to become available. And that in itself then is leading to difficulties in terms of that incremental delivery and release of accommodation. In addition to that, it's resulting in those kind of contrasted environments while we're trying to meet the government standards of a higher residential density with the inclusion of apartments with housing. We're resulting in low density enclaves of housing and high density enclaves of apartments. And that is represents a very poorly integrated type of neighbourhood, and is contrary to the type of integrated neighbourhoods that we're really aspiring to achieve. And I suppose there is too that lack of flexibility in interpretation of development plan guidelines by local authorities, and that in itself is impeding in the delivery of innovative housing solutions. So notwithstanding that some development plans would suggest that there is the potential for flexibility, achieving those type of standards are not the norm. It's they're one-off and can't necessarily be achieved readily. In addition to, we have to be mindful of housing supply targets that are being proposed within the local authority development plans, and that they in themselves would be difficult to achieve the housing supply requirements that we require when we consider the population growth that we've had. In addition to that, the influx of additional population arising from the war in Ukraine, but also in migration as well. And as a result of those application of those growth restrictions, that in itself then is inhibiting planning permissions going forward in the current development plan cycles. So that's something that needs to be addressed as well. So I suppose in response to all of this, our housing task force have been researching the low-rise medium density topology. And this is a topology that exists in many European countries, including Sweden, Denmark and Finland, Netherlands, Germany, and indeed further afield to Australia and New Zealand. And what we have found is that it achieves a really high quality dwelling, but dwellings too that are integrated into existing neighbourhoods and then can create really a good quality identifiable neighbourhoods for new neighbourhoods that we're aspiring to achieve. And the types of densities that it achieves are in the range of the 35 to 80 dwelling per hectare, which is more in line with the government's aspirations are for our settlements. And it is more in line, I suppose, with that concept of what a sustainable settlement would be, both in terms of the vibrancy of that neighbourhood and also the infrastructure that it can support, those additional services that it can support. And what we found is, just through analysis, is that there are just a few minor adjustments that would be required. These are outlined on this slide here just for simplicity, but just to go through them, there are a number of key requirements. These are four. I suppose the first one is that many of you will be familiar with the design manual for urban roads and streets. And I suppose the emphasis of the design manual for urban roads and streets, which I have to say is a really, really good document. It is really a people first approach, and it is that sense that it's not really about roads, it's about creating streets and streets for living. And that is promoting that environment is a very high quality. And what's really important there is that within this new criteria that we're suggesting that this should be a requirement, that we do comply with the design manual for urban roads and streets in terms of quality placemaking, and it is coming down to that idea of the streets being a means to achieve really positive places for people to live. We're suggesting an adjustment to the private open space standards, and what we're saying there is that this is designed in such a way that there's very good access. It can be configured in a way that you're maximizing that open space that is being provided. It's a slightly smaller provision of private open space, but that we're suggesting that the quality of the public open space would balance that reduced level, but it's in no way diminution of the quality of the home, because there'd be very good access to that open space, and great consideration would be given in terms of orientation, so that you're maximizing the benefit. We're suggesting that car parking will be reduced to one space per dwelling, and that there be provision of car sharing. And car sharing is a fantastic means. It will support behavioural change in terms of the number of cars that people feel that they need, but it also allows for the opportunity to give that space over then to the open space and to enhance the quality of the environment that is outside of the home. And that's that's again integrated with that whole overall concept of creating a great neighbourhood. We're also suggesting then that separation distances are reduced to 14 metres, but 16 metres between opposing windows. And I suppose the 14-metre distance wouldn't have opposing windows, but I suppose the important part of this is that with the architect's skill there, that you can achieve these good quality standards, and that you're ensuring the protection and amenity and privacy of each of the dwellings. And this can actually be achieved, and we have seen this, and indeed we have designed these type of homes as well. Additional requirements that we're also suggesting, and this goes without saying, that homes are designed with universal design, and that all homes are providing for future adaptability. And that's really important in terms of supporting, you know, multi-generational neighbourhoods, that you ensure that you get that great mix of places where people can live and it can be self-supporting, having that mix of multi-generational living. And so we want our homes to be flexible and to be lifetime, but also that the public open space is to a very high standard, and that the entire public realm achieves this standard. And I suppose that takes into consideration that land is a finite resource, and we need to absolutely maximize this and make it multifunctional as well, and that we get the best value from that space. But we achieve really high quality daylight and sunlight, and that we optimize access to this within our homes as well, and that we adopt more energy efficient ways about going about design, which I think has become the norm as well, that we're minimizing embodied and operational carbon. And so when we look to the benefits of this model, and I suppose it can be summarized really down to those 4 key elements, that there are physical benefits, social benefits, and economic benefits to this. And we also achieve the sustainable use of the existing infrastructure and land. This model can promote really high quality streets and squares and spaces, and can bring parallel improvements in the quality of the public realm. And that in itself then can improve local connections, integrating nature-based solutions to creating really good places to live, a sense of place and a sense of identity. In addition to that, they're readily integrated into an existing neighbourhood, and that's very positive both for the existing communities but also for new households, that you get that sense of community, sense of integration with that community as well. And I suppose it starts to eliminate the adversarial planning processes that we have become used to, and that we need to try to address. It also allows for more diversity in housing models and choice, and it can encourage sustainable compact settlement. And I suppose within those first 4, what we're really achieving is a higher quality design, that we're achieving diversity, and that we're achieving the densities that we're trying to, that are being promoted and that we need to be achieving. The other aspects of it as well, of course, are the social and economic benefits, that we're achieving and encouraging incremental growth and early delivery. That in itself can reduce risks and costs to the contractor, to the developer, but it also makes much better sense in terms of ensuring that we get this continual delivery of homes. It can also encourage standardized traditional forms of construction, but it also lends itself as well to the incorporation of the use of prefabricated systems, modern methods of construction. And I suppose then using this then as well, we can reduce complexity in terms of construction, and that in itself then can promote the development of smaller schemes that are accessible to more small to medium firms and contractors. And that in itself then as well creates great resilience in the construction industry, that we can facilitate the growth to medium to small developers and contractors, creating a pipeline of work so that we get that multiplier effect and that multiple benefit of a more resilient construction sector, but also that continuous flow and delivery of homes. As well as that, there's a reduced cost and risk associated with this, because we increase the viability and grow confidence in the national funding vehicles. And I suppose what's really important in terms of that is that we are achieving more certainty and more consistency. And that is really what the immediate positive impact and benefit of this and the potential is, to address that current housing crisis that we have, allowing for consistency and certainty and clarity as well in terms of delivery. So just to look quickly at what this means in practice, and I suppose this is a typology that is just illustrated for illustrative purposes, just to show the benefit. So the typical configuration here based on the current standards, and then what the reduced back gardens, reduced area of private open space, and what that lends itself. And we can see there that we get an increased, there's a 20% saving in land use for the similar number of units achieved. And that in itself can go to providing more homes, but it also represents a much better distribution of the open space, which brings the added value and benefit to the homes and to the community that is being delivered. And then when we look at it in terms of the type of neighbourhoods that can be created, that we're creating, I suppose you can see the added value and benefit of the reduced car parking spaces, that we get much greater opportunities to facilitate shared surfaces and home zones, public amenity spaces. And this in itself then starts to lend itself to promoting a much more walkable neighbourhoods. I suppose recent studies demonstrate just the value and benefit of active travel and walkable neighbourhoods in terms of the happiness and quality of life that it brings together, with also just in terms of the quality of the overall environment. But we can see here that we get a very nice mix of use of owned or dwellings, lower scale apartment developments alongside terraces of housing, but also the potential of duplex dwellings as well. So there's a great mix and quality of environment being created. And if we look at the type of precedents, we've identified a number, and these are really great demonstrations of the types of quality homes that can be delivered. Marmalade Lane by Mole Architects, lovely name, but also a lovely place as well, where we get shared gardens and shared amenity space to the front, and we can see a really great and attractive environment for that community. It's a safe place for children to play, and for elderly people as well to navigate and to live in, but also fantastic for families. And you can see the diversity as well, just in terms of the dwelling typology and how much interest and that creates a really strong sense of place and identity. These aren't same, they're responding to particular contexts, and there's huge value in that it gives people a really strong sense of place and sense of identity as well. Another typology as well, and then while separation distances are reduced in this, we're still achieving really high amenity in terms of privacy, but that also just in terms of the building, the language and the quality of the environment that is being created. And then the abode schemes in Cambridge, and many of you will be familiar with these, and I suppose what we achieve here again are that mix of density, that there are terraces and townhouses and alongside apartments. And then in addition to that, there are rows of muse homes and individual homes. So again, great diversity, but it's a very imaginative way in terms of distribution of open space, reduced car parking, landscaping initiatives, but also in terms of the architectural language and quality as well, that we get those really high quality places for living. And I suppose in order to achieve this, I suppose, and the value and benefit of it, again, just to reiterate, I suppose, we feel that this new housing model is a great means to enable architects, urban designers and clients, as well as the public and private sector, to produce this really high quality new generation of sustainable residential communities that meet the needs of the 21st century. And it can facilitate the provision of sustainable, affordable and attractive homes that will be widely acceptable, I think, to existing communities. And it has that potential, it lends itself to those difficult places that were spaces left over after planning, but those infill places, backlands, brownfield sites, but also those suburban development sites. So it's very applicable and adaptable for each of those environments. And it can significantly raise standards and improve the choice of housing and quality of the public realm in residential neighbourhoods. So what we're asking from the government is to facilitate this, in the short term, that there be greater flexibility in the interpretation of development plan guidelines, but that in itself then can be adopted into future legislation to inform future development plans. I suppose we're asking the Minister for Housing to provide the enabling mechanism in which we can bring this in to policy, and in the form of new housing planning standards. And I suppose it's part of the policy approach that's been proposed in the draft Sustainable Compact Settlement Guidelines, and that's good, and we're reviewing that in terms of its detail. But I suppose what would also be of value is the provision of a low-rise medium density good practice guide, which we'd be very happy to provide input to demonstrate what that might be. So that finishes my slide. I'll stop sharing there, and perhaps we could leave it open for discussion.
That was excellent. Thanks, Charlotte, and incredibly efficient on time. Well done.
Yes.
It's unheard of for Simon Talk. So I would say to people, I see one question here, which I'll put to Charlotte now. Do pop your questions into the Q&A box or into the chat, and we'll put them as we go. Excuse me, I have a touch of a head cold, so I'm not at the height of my powers, but I'll manfully struggle on with my man flu. So the first question, Charlotte, was this will suit so many tenants who require single owned or ground level housing, so it's great to see. But is there much room to create beauty either within or without, either with classical or modern plaster molding techniques? So I'm guessing that's an architect's question.
That's yeah, I suppose that's very specific, I suppose, in relation to a particular element. But I mean, I suppose one of the key things that we would always promote in this as well is design quality. I'm not sure if the question classical and modern plaster. Well, I mean, I think that can be down to the detail, but of course, I mean, wonderful homes can be created, and the ways in which we can do that. And I suppose maybe the question relates to materials and quality of materials that are being used in the type of construction. And I suppose what you could see in the various different precedents that we've identified as well, that you do get that variety in materials. And often it can be useful to look at the existing context and to integrate the type of materiality of that particular neighbourhood and to bring it into it, you know, so that you get that kind of level of integration as well, which can be very nice.
And I suppose that is part of the, so that there are two things that I sort of want to put you. One is the benefits. One, I suppose, are there concerns which are usually put forward about these kind of, when you increase density, that you increase that sense of people being on top of each other, and that can, you know, makes communities less sustainable. So I think part of the answer from looking at your, particularly the illustrations, the examples, sorry, that you gave, I think are thing of that. So that's really about greening and reducing, you know, making better use of space to create more sustainable communities. But how do you get that balance, I think, is one of the questions.
Yeah, and I think I did mention just the adversarial nature of planning the way it over the last number of years, and I suppose it is where people are existing communities are having to absorb new residential developments and in proximate to their existing places. And I suppose with the requirement to achieve those higher densities, what we did see were those higher development forms. And sometimes that can feel very incongruous and can feel very imposing on an existing neighbourhood. And I suppose what it is that we're promoting here is that you get that potential for a transitional arrangement. I suppose the model that started to emerge was that you got the enclaves of the lower density traditional suburban form alongside those higher apartments. And I suppose that is the higher apartments have now proving to be unviable just at the moment. So this model that we're suggesting is a kind of transitional arrangement. They might be 2 to 4 floors, so that you get that better opportunities to more readily integrate, you know, a form of development that is compatible, or it is that stepping up maybe to a higher density as well. And so I suppose it's much easier for people to get the sense that while an area or a neighbourhood might be changing, but that it's incrementally changing, and that it's not such a stark contrast, and that there are added benefits and value to this as well. I suppose what we're suggesting is that you place a strong emphasis on the quality of open space. And so that would be of benefit to the new community, but it's also to the existing community. That's what we would often see in regeneration of existing brownfield sites, that there are significant opportunities to increase accessibility in terms of creating new streets. And what you're often doing is creating or opening up what would be a desire line for a community. Sometimes there are barriers in street networks that don't allow you to get to a place efficiently, or the way the crow flies, or, but that by opening up backlands and creating these new networks of streets through these new developments, that you're getting that added value for the existing community in terms of the permeability of their community as well, to different parts of that particular urban settlement, so that there's significant value there in that as well.
Thanks for that. I think you've actually answered. We now have 11 questions outstanding. I'm going to try and so you're generating lots of really good questions, so that's fab. So I'm just going to take them in turn and see. There's something maybe a little bit. I think first question is from Rory, and I think you've captured some of it in your previous answer, but I'll outline it, and if you want to add to what you've said. So firstly, obviously, people are a constant is thank yous for the quality and the interest in your presentation. I think people are finding it really informative. And so the question from Rory is, why do you think this hasn't been developed thus far in Ireland? Is there a danger that it will lead to reduced housing standards? And so we've seen some developers pushing for something like this in this ballpark of increased density, and with the perception and certainly the reality of it seems to be that it's rather a means to boost profits, or create more for less. So what's the difference between sort of that general reduced standards to encourage developers to build more, as opposed to this, which I think is a much more sustainable way forward?
Yeah.
Is it the same? Yeah. So what are the?
Yeah. Your sound went on mute there, Wayne, but just I can answer that. Yeah, and I suppose the emphasis here really is that we are on we are proposing that it is very much quality embedded, and that the quality design ensures that there's no diminution in terms of the quality of the dwelling that's being proposed, but there's a very strong emphasis on the quality of the spaces between the buildings, that you're getting that added on benefit in terms of the quality of the urban environment that is being created as well. So that's and I think that I've addressed those other things as well that Rory was querying too. I mean, why it hasn't happened has related to those regulatory standards that are in place, which is really, and I suppose they were developed in the early 1900s, and it was to ensure that it was the lowest common denominator to a certain extent, that it was not necessarily allowing for that design innovation. But I suppose what we need absolutely is a discerning local authority that can differentiate good quality from poor quality, and that's where it's really important that we do get those multidisciplinary skills within the local authorities too, that we get that that we have that really good understanding of what is design quality. But I suppose what we would absolutely be promoting is that it is coming from a quality point of view. That quality agenda is very much embedded in this.
Sorry, I'm going to keep going with questions.
Yeah, keep going. Yeah.
Good questions for true innovation in housing layout design, and then associated impact on the quality public realm. There's a need for behavioural change in travel. One would need to separate the car from the house. For example, the separate car parking garage in Freiburg. Have you considered these types of models?
Yeah, and of course, yeah, we've looked at Freiburg as a fantastic model in terms of, and a great example of a plan-led approach, I suppose, that our government are currently promoting, that you develop a plan that you stick to. Freiburg had a plan that was a 30-year, or certainly a long-term vision about how it is they wanted to achieve what they were achieving. And there's huge value in that. But I suppose, and in Freiburg, they do separate the cars so that you get entirely pedestrian zones. And of course, that can be achieved. I suppose what we're suggesting is, and maybe we would move to a model like that and facilitate that type of development, what we're suggesting is that you would have shared spaces, perhaps, so that you do get that separation. And I would agree, you know, the car beside the home and creating front gardens to accommodate a car doesn't make sense. It doesn't add quality to the public realm or to the quality of that environment. So there's lots of different ways. And I think the design manual for urban roads and streets does point to that as well. And I suppose if we can move more towards that, it's certainly where we want to be, getting to.
Okay, thanks for that. So Noel has a couple of questions. How does this approach facilitate smaller schemes, SME contractors? You address, I suppose, just expand on that point that you made in your presentation. And I suppose one of the questions, and this is something we've seen in previous presentations, is that when you increase density, one of the context of that is you increase land value, and therefore that, you know, there are knock-on impacts of that. So is that factored into the thinking and in terms of the land value impact and the economic impact of that more generally?
Yeah, well, I suppose in answer to the first question, I mean, the SME and the smaller models, I suppose what we're suggesting, and which, you know, as a parent in this type of model, is that it can be delivered incrementally. And I suppose from an SME, from a small contractor point of view, that is a very, it's a very very efficient way to deliver homes, that you can provide incrementally, sell and progress to the next. You know, it's you're ensuring that your cash flow is maintained and that you're not waiting for completion out for an entire scheme. But also, as well as that, you can phase it in such a way that you can deliver and start to create communities. And in terms of addressing the housing crisis, you know, that's a really efficient way and a great way to deliver these places, that you're working towards building up the community, and it can be done in that way. In terms of land value, I mean, that to a certain extent, it is related and a separate matter, but I suppose just in terms of densities, you know, you are getting I suppose when it comes to value, that you are getting the density that meets that, and that, I suppose, look, that issue is so interrelated as well, I suppose, and it does depend on what the cost of it was in the first instance, in terms of what it is that you're trying to deliver and to ensure that what it is that is viable. But I think a lot of the measures that are being promoted in Housing for All, or those kind of land value considerations, have potential to address this issue as well. Okay.
Yeah, so I suppose that, and it also feeds into that, while we want more housing, we also want affordable housing, and I think that's, yeah, that's why it's so important. Thank you for that. We have actually from the chair of the Simon Communities of Ireland, thanks to you and the RIAI for your continuing support and generosity, but also a question, which I think is something that's been posited a few times, and I suppose just to get your sense of it, is there a need for sort of to bring all these different aspects together, and given where we are in the housing crisis, is there a need for a housing czar to move past kind of the older regulations and planning delays to seriously address the current capacity dilemma? I mean, is there kind of a top-down, given where we are in the crisis currently, particularly?
Yeah, funny. Somebody else said that recently. It must be gaining momentum. You know, honestly, I mean, you know, there does come a point where you feel that it's really important that we do get that leadership and that we do get that vision as to how it is we can achieve this. And you know, if that's something that would be considered by all, why not? You know, in terms of you know, putting a really strong focus on what are the means and methods that we can adopt, and that focus that we can really put to solving this issue, and solving it in a way that it's not something that we're looking to down the line, but that it's something that is immediate. I suppose you have to be mindful that you don't do the knee-jerk reaction. We have done so many, I suppose we have, if you reflect on all of the different things that we have done over the last number of years within that, and we have to come to a point where there must be a sustainable solution to that incremental delivery, and to ensure that we can get to a point where we don't reach this crisis at another point in time in the future. I mean, I suppose, Wayne, this is something that we discussed before we came on the call, but that we do look at the resources that we have. We're in a unique position in this country with population growth. What a fantastic position to be in. We have other countries in Europe who are crying out for population growth. This is an amazing resource, and we should treat that resource in a proper way and provide those homes, and to find the means in which to do that. And we have the skills and we have the ability, and by all accounts, those resources appear to be there, but it's a matter of using that properly and efficiently and effectively.
And do you think, sorry, I don't want to go too far down different questions, because I'm kind of want to get to everybody's question, but I suppose one of the concerns, maybe we just leave it at this, one of the concerns is if you create a czar, you can also disempower local authorities and just create conflict, and maybe you could create more capacity for conflict and less activity, rather than sort of providing people with the tools.
Yeah, no, and that's where collaboration is absolutely key, and everybody works collaboratively, but that you get that multidisciplinary approach as well, that you get the stakeholders involved. And I suppose we do, and forums like this are really good for this type of, cross discussion, that we can identify with what are the barriers that each of us are finding, and what are those solutions that we can try to bring to this. So collaboration is really, really critical.
Yeah, so maybe while there might be a need for a bit more coordination, I think a czar is probably the wrong name for or her. So Michael is the next question. Are the design criteria equally applicable in rural towns and villages, for instance, car ownership in the context of a lack of transport infrastructure?
Oh yeah, I think that this could really lend itself well to the Irish town and village. I mean, when we look at the infrastructure that's already in place in these towns and villages, and also the potential for these places as a viable place to live and to reside in terms of the remote working, but even indeed they are in places that are readily accessible to places of work as well. But that within those towns, I suppose what we would like to see those places to become are self-sustainable communities, that they do have those services. I think that during COVID, we got that glimpse into what it is that our towns can be. And maybe it's a glimpse into what they were in the past, that you had all of the services at your doorstep, but they need people. They need people to support those services that are within those. And so that if you get people living in those, maybe there's less reliance and less need for a car. So one car parking space should be sufficient. Also, there's great rollout now in terms of the local link and town links, in terms of connecting towns, the county town, to the smaller rural bases as well. They're demand driven, and the more that can be rolled out as well, the less reliance on the car we'd have. In addition to that, we've got the blueways and greenways, which make it much easier to make connections, through active travel, and it all creates just generally a much better, healthier environment. So no, this is really can really lend itself to our Irish towns and villages. And I suppose that's where we'd see this housing competition that we have and that we're carrying out at the moment in collaboration with the department and the 4 local authorities. That might be a really good demonstration model of how this type of model might follow through.
Okay. Yeah, and I think it really speaks to that. Again, there's something about not waiting till you have the capacity to start putting in the bus. It's to put in the bus in advance and plan it out. Yeah. So Jennifer has a question. How do we get estate agents on board who often advise developers, house builders, especially in more rural regional towns, who hold the 3-bed semi on the curtilage, parking and 60 square meters of rear garden as the ideal, and advise against smaller tenure spaces or communal gardens?
Yeah, this is where collaboration is key, isn't it? And that we have these conversations and we can demonstrate as well and show, what is possible, what the potential is, and and how it can meet the needs of contemporary society as well. But what is the added value of moving away from that suburban type model, reliance on the car, to this more urban living? It is a type of urban living, but that it's a very attractive and a very good way to live, in terms of, I even think, and I'd often look to Irish towns as well, where the population moved out and people moved to rural locations. And sometimes we find in regeneration projects that we're doing that there's a great desire for people who ended up in those rural locations wanting to move back into town, because those services are the things that they actually need then as they get older in life, but also in terms of bringing up families as well, just in terms of that close connectedness and the self-supporting way in which families can support and help each other, and proximity is key in that, but that you can have that degree of separation, but that closeness as well. Perfect.
Absolutely. So Kai has the name, would the RIAI consider promoting master planning and urban competitions in favour of individual planning applications in the future?
I mean, I think what's being promoted by government is a plan-led approach. And if we look at the models of, what has been really successful, and so you can look to the town of Westport. So they had a plan in place for their town back in 2000. They rely on that still. That gave a good sense of infrastructure as well as urban development. But then when we look at the more larger scale urban planning models, such as the STZ, the planning scheme and the Dublin Docklands, that's a great example of a plan-led approach. And that gave great clarity in terms of the development form, the mix of use, emphasis on good quality space. And there's no reason why that isn't implementable too in smaller scale. So I suppose the Planning and Development Bill is suggesting those urban area plans within urban contexts, and we would see that they could form a type of master planning that gives that certainty to places, and that can, I suppose, then give very good direction at an early stage of what is acceptable in that neighbourhood. And that in itself then can be a very systematic way in which applications can be processed through a planning system. And I suppose what you want to do is to get at a master planning stage is participation by the community, so that's when all of the issues are discussed at the planning stage. So we would see absolutely that there's great potential in having that level of good quality three-dimensional planning, but also that quality planning at the early stages that will then inform what a future of a neighbourhood could be.
Okay, thank you for that. So Felix, I think, asked one of the really pertinent questions. Are you, as the RIAI, fully satisfied that this model can deliver upwards of 50,000 accommodation units each year going forward at affordable prices for most purchasers?
Yeah, and I suppose the solution isn't just one model, it's several models. And in terms of the costings, actually we're looking at that in more detail, just in terms of the wider cost implications of this. I suppose in first instance, I suppose it's more viable just in terms of the form of development, and also that it's achieving the densities, but that I suppose just in terms of how that could be delivered out, that there's a piece of work in that as well. But just in terms of achieving the 50,000, it's not this model that would achieve all of that, but that it's one part of a solution, I would say.
So there's a group of questions here now from Anonymous. I think if it's not the same person, they're certainly related. So I'm going to try and capture them. But I think it's really important. And I suppose the question really is the power of architecture. So in relation to walkable communities and car sharing, it's not necessarily the remit of RIAI, but do you see a role for the local authorities in owning and managing a car sharing service? It points out it's often argued that Irish urban population traditionally and culturally think of a home as low-rise, low-density place. Can architects and planners change or alter this thinking? So do we have to put it in place and get people to buy into it, or is it how do we, I suppose, it's on a theme of what we were talking about earlier and about that collaboration and how do we move to change the thinking. And is there scope for the RIAI to consider the implementation of rural housing schemes in greater detail? Current policy documents, generally speaking, are more urban-centric and more tone-deaf in terms of offering realistic guidance for the design of housing schemes in rural Ireland. So there's quite a bit in that, but they're kind of all very
Yeah, I suppose just firstly in relation to local authority ownership, I mean, that's there are lots of there's a lot of car sharing, GoCar being one of them, and there are a number of other car sharing organizations. So I'm not sure whether the local authority would get into that delivery themselves personally, but just in terms of the local authority, I'm actually look to your questions there. In terms of this being, how do you convince people? I mean, I think communication is absolutely critical and key in terms of what it is that creates a great place to live. In the past, we lived in these urban environments. We're very used to living in towns and in these urban settlements, and they provided really good quality homes. I think the Old House New Home is a really great demonstration of what these places can be, and in terms of what these homes can be and what this type of urban living can be like. But communication is absolutely critical, and I suppose that the more that we can get the opportunity to develop demonstration models of this and to be able to show that to people as well. But and there's a key role to play within a multitude of people. I would say it's the local authorities in terms of their towns and villages and urban places as well, just to show what these can become. And I suppose that's where architects can really play a strong role, I suppose, in terms of our communication skills, but also our design skills as well, to demonstrate how a place can be transformed and how it can, what type of quality of environment it can provide. I suppose we would always say, just in terms of the rural areas, I mean, there's certainly, and I spoke earlier before about the potential of this model in towns and villages, and I would say absolutely this is appropriate for those type of locations. And I suppose when we look at the models and the guidance documents, I suppose it is always useful to demonstrate it in different contexts. Our urban design manual a number of years ago did demonstrate that, and there's a huge value in that, to show, you know, what is a model like in different contexts, whether it's in the backlands of a town, or whether it's in suburban areas, or whether it's in newer neighborhoods. And I suppose that's the value of communication as well, in terms of, you know, the visualization that you can accompany with projects.
Okay. Thank you for that. So I'll get to our last two questions now. The one is kind of a practical one, which I think it probably speaks to how architecture will continue to innovate, and how does that happen? Is it how is the move towards electric cars and charge points going to be addressed with communal parking? Is domestic charging going to be possible?
Is it a key piece of infrastructure, public infrastructure? I know it's a good question. I mean, who pays? Actually, I mean, I suppose we've seen the rollout of electric charge points becoming much more widespread, and I mean, that is something that has to be looked at as well. It will be a piece of public infrastructure, and how it is that you can pay for that. Maybe that's something that can be looked at as well. Yeah.
And I suppose the other than the thank yous that are coming in, I think the final question is, do you feel that the architecture profession could be more vocal as advocates or even activists for the built environment?
I suppose advocacy is something that we as an institute, that's one of our remits as well, and we do advocate for good quality development, and I suppose it needs to be aligned with you know, what it is that we're trying to achieve as a collective, as a society, and that's very much part and parcel of what we do. And I would hope that our communications, well, I think we're increasing our communication ability. Taking part in events like this is really important to us as well, just in terms of us communicating what it is that we're, and what our approach is about.
Okay. Well, I think we've timed that just about perfectly. So
Great.
Well done, Charlotte. Thank you. And thank you to everybody who's still with us. Thank you for your such a level of engagement. It's been really, really positive, and I think helped us to unpack some of the questions. So bravo to you too. With that, with the final thank you to Charlotte, and with a final thank you to all of our colleagues in the RIAI who both supported us in getting this on. I see Sandra is here as well. Sandra, do you want to have the very final word?
Oh, thank you very much, Wayne. Well, just to say a huge thank you to you and especially to Charlotte for this fantastic webinar today. And it's been an absolute pleasure to participate in the Simon Talks with the Simon community, and hope we will continue to do that. And maybe if there's any architects and members listening in today, look, we still need a good few architects for the RIAI Simon Open Door campaign. The campaign is in full swing at the moment. There's a huge demand from the public, and we want to raise as many funds as we can, you know, for the Simon communities and their work for homelessness. So if there's any architects listening, please sign up for our RIAI Simon Open Door campaign. Thank you so much, everybody.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Sandra. I'm sorry for dropping you in it there right at the end. And Charlotte, thank you for giving us so much of your time. It's really appreciated.
Yeah, not at all. My pleasure. Thank you, Wayne.
And to everybody who participated. So with that, we'll close. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.